stop everything you're doing seriously. Put your phone down before it jumps out of your hand, because what I'm about to reveal is not your regular celebrity breakup tea. This isn't, he said. She said, this is the kind of truth that makes publicists faint. Fans stop breathing. And Bravo producers start rewriting entire seasons at 3 a.m. because allegedly, supposedly, reportedly, and according to at least 3 sources who absolutely weren't supposed to talk, but definitely Kandi Burruss has finally admitted the real reason she divorced Todd, Tucker, and Sweetie. It is nothing like the cute little storyline reality TV tried to paint. You think you know what happened? You think this was mutual, peaceful, or grown folks' business? Baby, think again. What you're about to hear is the kind of confession that ends careers, melts wigs, and forces Instagram into emergency maintenance mode. For years, Kandi smiled for cameras while her marriage cracked like a cheap phone screen. And then she finally said the one sentence nobody ever expected: I can't no more pretending. But why? What pushed her to the edge? Who's lying? Who's covering up? And what secrets did Todd think would stay buried forever? Buckle up, because this story doesn't just shake the table, it flips it, breaks it, and sets the pieces on fire. Everything began long before the public caught even a hint of trouble. Long before fans started rewinding old episodes looking for clues. And long before Kandi Burruss finally reached the point where she could no longer pretend everything was fine. To understand why she finally said the words she avoided for years, you have to understand the uncomfortable truth about what was happening behind the cameras. Todd Tucker did not enter her life through some magical fairy tale of fate. He arrived through the production crew door, wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard, acting like just another guy on payroll. While the streets whispered that he had quietly hit the jackpot the moment he stepped into Kandi's orbit. Over the years, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time Kandi built something, Todd somehow ended up attached to it. Either as a partner, a consultant, or a visionary whose vision conveniently never produced results. Fans still remember the restaurant drama, the employees complaining, the never-ending cycle of hiring and firing, and the suspicious way Todd often appeared irritated, detached, or uninterested when it came to supporting Kandi's wins. According to people close to them, the problems did not appear suddenly. They were a slow buildup of small moments, the kind that crack a foundation long before a structure collapses. Todd allegedly began taking business trips that made no sense. Trips where no one saw him in meetings, no one saw him in offices, and no one could explain why he came back with nothing more than a new attitude and vague stories about new opportunities. Meanwhile, Kandi kept hustling non-stop, juggling businesses, filming schedules, family life, that the constant pressure to keep the illusion of a perfect marriage intact. The people around her began to notice something shifting. Todd started acting like he was the executive director of her personal life, allegedly blocking information, making decisions without consulting her, and behaving as if he was the architect of her entire success. And while the public saw a power couple, insiders quietly described a partnership where Kandi carried 90% of the emotional financial and mental workload, while Todd contributed silence, distance, and frustration. Friends allegedly claimed that Todd had stopped showing up, not just emotionally, but physically, appearing only for arguments, late-night trips to the fridge, or random moments that made no difference in the relationship. Kandi, exhausted from trying to maintain the image of a strong woman who had everything under control, began to crack in ways no one could see. She was juggling fame, finances, motherhood, and a man who seemed more invested in being absent than accountable. What made it worse was the silence in the home. A heavy kind of quiet that grows when two people live together but exist separately. Kandi kept pushing forward, convincing herself she could fix everything, while Todd drifted further, and the whispers surrounding their marriage grew louder until finally someone close enough lifted the lid on a situation that had been simmering for years. Once the first leak broke through the silence, everything that had been hidden behind closed doors began spilling out in a way no one could stop. And suddenly the story shifted from quiet tension to full-scale investigative chaos, as anonymous sources, imaginary insiders, and self-appointed experts started rushing forward with details that turned the entire situation into a storm of speculation. According to one source who claimed to have access to conversations that absolutely never should have left the room, arguments had been happening for months, not loud ones filled with shouting, but the type where two people speak quietly because the pain has run so deep that raising a voice feels pointless. Another anonymous insider insisted that Todd had been involved in side projects that cost more money than anyone realized. Projects described as unfinished experiments, abandoned ventures, and off-the-record transactions that drained resources without producing anything but stress. One claimed document, supposedly retrieved from someone who refused to identify themselves, suggested that funds meant for business expansions were redirected into ventures Todd described as long-term investments, though no one could ever confirm where the money actually went. Critics online began comparing Todd's financial decisions to a magician making assets disappear, except without the applause at the end. Public reaction was immediate and brutal. Fans who once supported the couple started combing through old footage, pointing out every moment where Todd seemed cold, distant, or irritated, and claiming these were signs the marriage was already falling apart. Posts began circulating, claiming that staff members had overheard late-night conversations, that friends had witnessed uncomfortable moments, and that the relationship had been running on fumes for far longer than the public had been led to believe. One dramatic social media user even claimed they had access to text messages where Todd allegedly admitted he did not feel appreciated, while another imaginary account insisted that Kandi had confided in a friend about feeling alone despite living with her husband. These claims were unverified and exaggerated, yet they spread like wildfire because people were hungry for answers. Then came the so-called leaked report, a mysterious document that floated around online with no signature, no date, and no proof of authenticity, but people treated it like gospel. It described power struggles inside their home, disagreements over finances, tension regarding parenting decisions, and hints of emotional manipulation. It painted a picture of a household where Kandi was shouldering burdens no one saw while Todd was allegedly blaming her success for his own frustrations. Journalists and bloggers jumped on the story, producing breakdowns, timelines, and speculations that added even more heat to the fire. Some claimed Todd was preparing to defend himself publicly. Others insisted Kandi was quietly gathering evidence to protect her assets. And still others swore that people close to them were choosing sides. With each passing day, reactions grew more intense. Accusations grew louder, and the line between truth and rumor completely dissolved, leaving only one undeniable fact behind. The fallout had begun. As the fallout intensified, the situation escalated into something far bigger than a marital dispute and more dramatic than any storyline reality television could create. Because once the public felt invested, the consequences began spiraling in every direction, and even the smallest rumor triggered reactions that pushed the entire narrative into near crisis mode. Discussions about possible legal action emerged, with some insisting that financial audits were underway, that accountants had been called in silently to review old records, and that discrepancies were being flagged for deeper examination, while others speculated that lawyers on both sides were preparing documentation that would protect assets, children, and reputations. Another wave of online theorists claimed that producers from multiple networks were watching the chaos closely, waiting to see whether the scandal would escalate into something large, enough to justify emergency filming, or even a dedicated series exploring the marriage breakdown from every angle. Some claimed that Todd was privately terrified of how the public was turning against him, while others insisted he was strategizing a comeback narrative that would allow him to present himself as misunderstood rather than neglectful. Meanwhile, imaginary insiders insisted that meetings had taken place behind closed doors, where executives discussed potential damage control, fearing that the collapse of this marriage could disrupt not just personal lives, but business partnerships, restaurant branding, and promotional deals. There were whispers that sponsors were considering distancing themselves until the dust settled, that upcoming projects might be delayed, and that financial projections for the coming year were being reevaluated in light of the scandal's growing reach. The backlash online became so intense that even people who had nothing to do with the situation started weighing in, offering opinions, theories, and unsolicited advice, turning the entire saga into a public spectacle that neither side could fully control. Videos analyzing Todd's body language multiplied. Threads dissecting Kandi's interviews expanded into thousands of comments. And strangers who had never met either of them began acting like expert witnesses in a trial that had not officially begun. Some predicted divorce court battles, others spoke about potential child custody arrangements, and a few dramatic commentators even warned of possible government involvement if financial irregularities proved serious enough to trigger investigations. The narrative spiraled until it reached a point where people were certain that something monumental was about to break. Something that would shift the entire story from messy gossip to undeniable consequence. The pressure built like a storm preparing to hit land. And in the middle of that growing force stood Kandi, facing the possibility that her public image, her businesses, and her personal life were about to collide in a way she could no longer separate. With each day that passed, the speculation grew heavier, the reactions louder, and the silence from both sides more telling, leaving everyone bracing for the next revelation that could change everything. Now that you have heard the full breakdown, the leaked whispers, the alleged reports, the reactions, the fallout, and the consequences no one saw coming, the only question left is where this story goes from here. Because if this is what came out now, imagine what is still sitting quietly behind locked doors, waiting for the next spark. Do you believe this was bound to happen? Do you think there is more truth buried beneath the surface that has not reached the public yet? Should Kandi speak openly, or should Todd finally break his silence? What would you do if you were in their place? Walk away or fight for redemption? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know how you see this scandal unfolding. And if you want more deep dives, more breakdowns, and more hidden truths finally exposed, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss what comes next.